You want to hear about a dress I saw on TV? Full disclosure, this is my third time sitting down to record this script in its entirety. The first two attempts resulted in completely unusable footage, but I am here and we're gonna try again, and this time we're gonna do it because the world needs to hear about this dress. So because I'm excited and because I have gone through the script before and because I have been watching a lot of CJ the X, we are gonna talk fast and we're gonna get through this. I promise you don't need to have watched The Great to understand how cool the thing I'm going to show you is, but you should definitely watch The Great anyway, it's amazing. The Great is funny and sharp and it has incredible performances, but when I talk about it with other people, the first thing I say is, oh my god, the costumes are so good. I look at so many of these costumes and I think if you took this look and you dropped it into any other period show or movie, this would be everybody's favorite costume in the whole thing. And there's like 24 of those in this show. In another context, they would be iconic, but because every single look is just that stellar, you kind of get used to it and none of them get appreciated sufficiently. I'm not trying to tell you that this show is some sort of overlooked gem or these costumes are underhyped. I mean, it won the Costuming Emmy in 2022, but I still think that they haven't reached the level of adoration they really deserve. So I am here to bring the adoration and the appreciation and to tell you about the #1 best costume in The Great. And it's not what you think. It's not this look, or this one, or this, although that one, put a pin in that one. We're gonna come back to that costume. This show's version of Catherine the Great is one of the best dressed characters on TV right now, but she doesn't wear the best costume in The Great. That's somebody else. I will talk about Catherine's costumes though, especially her season 2 looks, because they are giving us something very special and exciting. 18th century maternity wear. So let's talk for a second about 18th century maternity wear, a concept that just tickles me. It just seems wrong. Like, obviously I know intellectually that, you know, people were pregnant at that time, but should they have been? European fashion of the mid to late 1700s has a really specific silhouette, okay? It's all about the long torso with the low waist and the flat front. Shoulders back, bust squish. You know what? I have stays here somewhere. Okay, I am wearing these just over my whole modern situation, but you get the idea. We've got that magic triangle that's making a long torso. My waist is sitting really low. The front is super flat. If I wasn't wearing a modern bra, my bust would be like really high and kind of squished looking. You're telling me somebody is gonna be pregnant and wear this? Stays look extremely cute with this dress. Look at a little puff shoulder moment, the skirt, but I can't really imagine a worse silhouette for a pregnant body. Now, if you have a basic familiarity with European fashion history, you already know all this, and you also know that fashions for upper class women are about to totally change. By the 1810s, all the really stylish women were wearing these flowy empire waist gowns. It's actually really similar to what I'm wearing now. An amazing unplanned visual aid. So we're thinking something even a little higher than this that sits right below the bust line, so the waist is way higher than your natural waist, and then the skirts are all flowy and drapey and lovely. Even if you're not really a dress history person, you probably know what I'm talking about. Think Jane Austen movies, think Bridgerton, think Act 2 of Hamilton. So in that early part of the 19th century, empire waistlines were the trendy thing for formal wear and also just for everyday day wear. And visually, that just looks like that'd be ideal for pregnancy. You look nice still, you look put together, but you look comfortable. Let me tell you, this dress I'm wearing, very comfortable. Granted, there is some elastic involved, but still. If you walk into a store that sells maternity wear today, you're probably gonna see a ton of empire waistlines. In fact, for Regency era costuming, one of the challenges is making sure that the characters don't look like they're pregnant to a modern viewer. It's pretty easy to dress somebody in a fairly historically accurate Regency look that to someone in the Regency would probably look perfectly unremarkable, but to a modern viewer makes them think, oh, is that character pregnant? So go get another pin and put a pin in the Regency empire waistline, because we are talking about the mid-late 1700s, and at that point you were going to be way too early for the classically inspired Regency look. So if you were pregnant in like the 1770s, what the heck were you supposed to wear? Well, we can look to the material evidence first. And if you look at the material evidence, it might seem at first like there isn't a clear answer and we don't have enough to go on. There is very little extant maternity wear from this period to be found in museum collections. Now, even if you don't know anything about this period specifically, that fact alone isn't going to be really surprising to historians. As a general rule, survivorship bias heavily favors smaller items. The bigger an article is, the more likely it was that it was resized or repurposed at some point, so a maternity gown with all that extra extra fabric would be first on the chopping block. But survivorship bias actually isn't our main problem here. The historical record suggests that very little of what we would consider maternity wear actually existed in the first place in the 18th century.
What did they wear when they were pregnant? The shocking answer is the same thing they wore every other day.
Clothing was a very expensive and labor-intensive item during this period, as it was for most of human history, so it would always be preferable to alter what you already have than to go get or make something new. Having a dedicated item of clothing that is only wearable for a few months at a time, a handful of times in your life, that just doesn't make sense for the majority of people in this century. Based on what we know of the period, the most likely thing is that pregnant people did the same thing they did anytime their bodies changed shape or size. They took advantage of all of the ways that their clothes were made to be alterable and adjustable.
Women's clothing isn't only good for maternity, it's also good for you lose weight, you gain weight, you get older. Women's clothing has to be malleable.
18th century gowns have a lot of tricks up their sleeves that could be used to accommodate a pregnancy. It was really common for gowns to lace up or pin up the front across this piece called a stomacher, which were typically completely separate from the rest of the gown. You could swap them out for aesthetic reasons, but also to change the fit. You would always have to relace or repin the gown anyway, so you were basically refitting it to your body every time you wore it. The ultimate pregnancy hack was pretty simple, and that was to use a scarf or a large handkerchief to just cover it all up. Cover any gaps or unfashionable bulge. One of my faves from this period, Sarah, Duchess of Marlborough, she was usually quite fashionable, but we have a letter from her describing how she basically had to give up in her last trimester. I remember when I was within 3 months of my reckoning, I could never endure any bodice at all, but wore a warm waistcoat wrapped about me like a man's and tied my petticoats on top of it. And from that time never went abroad, but with a long black scarf to hide me, I was so prodigious big. I'm obsessed with the phrasing, I was so prodigious big. I'm gonna use that. Now there is one item of clothing that it does seem to have been common to make special for pregnancy, and that was a pair of maternity stays. Mine here lace up the back. At other parts of the century it was more common to lace up the front, and plenty of them had laces in the front and back. But maternity stays were really unique. They had lacing up the sides, and that lacing could be adjusted throughout the pregnancy to accommodate the growth in the belly. Other than that, they seem to have been mostly the same as standard stays. They would raise the bust and flatten the front by distributing that pressure on the sides of the waist and across the belly. And this actually still works if you have a baby bump. You kind of have more of a shelf to work with, actually. Maternity stays kept a woman's silhouette pretty consistent throughout the pregnancy, so she could keep dressing in the same style. Now, these stays were not worn for the purpose of hiding the bump, but that was kind of a side effect. There's only so much you can do to squish the belly in, but once the other parts of your body have been made to conform to that silhouette, it makes the belly easy to overlook. The entire approach to dressing for pregnancy in the 18th century has an entirely different goal than modern maternity wear. The whole idea of getting maternity clothing is that the clothes you already have are supposedly insufficient for the job. You have to have something that was designed with the bump in mind so that it's going to be comfortable and flattering. You gotta go buy more stuff. Today, the wealthiest and most visible pregnant women in the world typically wear a dedicated maternity wardrobe. There are definitely those cases where a famous person is trying to hide their pregnancy, but once the news is out, okay, once the pregnancy is known, it's really rare that they would dress in a way to hide the belly. You see a lot of skirts that are cut to drape across the belly from a high waist that clearly show off that new silhouette. In fact, a major concern in designing maternity wear is making sure that the person clearly obviously looks pregnant and could not be mistaken for having simply gained weight, because that is so freaking important.
You notice I am pregnant? Oh, I hoped that's what it was. Russians can be quite fat.
As previously discussed, empire waistlines are perfect for this because, to modern eyes, they make a person look pregnant. High society in the 18th century did not think a baby bump was like a fun fashion statement. They were pretty buttoned up about the whole thing, like the topic of pregnancy was considered really vulgar. So there were social and cultural reasons, as well as reasons of practicality, that women would keep wearing whatever they wore before the pregnancy for as long as possible until they absolutely had to account for the bump. And even then, they're not going to show off the bump. The bump wouldn't be clearly defined visually. Once you add on layers of skirts, and once you add on padding at the back or the hips, whichever was fashionable at the particular decade you're talking about, you end up with somebody that just looks big in a kind of undefined way. There's clearly something going on, but you're not getting, bump, you're just getting Now, of course, if you were a very rich and classy woman who was very invested in that kind of propriety, you probably weren't going out that much in your last few months of pregnancy anyway. For a woman of leisure, it was totally possible to spend most of the third trimester inside, off your feet, not worrying about dressing well until well after the baby is born. In this period, it was already socially acceptable if you were in your house, in the company of really intimate friends, to wear bedgowns or robes, things that are going to be really comfortable in pregnancy.
It's very new that it's okay to have your belly out there. So, you know, the cassock, the robatons, all of the bedgown, all of these rather A-line garments look the same on someone who's pregnant and someone who's not.
Now, did you get all that I just talked about the historical context? Because that's important. It's going to matter. It's coming back. But also, it doesn't matter. Irrelevant to the subject at hand. Because all that I just said was about most people. What if you weren't most people? What if you were a 1 in a million kind of woman? What if you were one of a handful of women in Europe that was so fabulously wealthy that you could afford to commission gowns that you would only wear a couple times, that you would only wear once? What if you were so uniquely powerful and ambitious that you kept working during your pregnancy? Not just working, but working in a public, active way. What would you wear then? That was the challenge for season 2 of The Great. I think just time for a tiara. Oh yes, the high bun gives Princess Diaries. The little pearly things like to rattle around, and if my mic is picking this up and making this an uncomfortable listening experience for you, I do expect you to keep watching. That is a sacrifice that I'm willing to make for art. The Great is a Hulu series that is pitched to us as an occasionally true story, and the costumes follow suit and are occasionally true to history. As a general rule, minor characters and the background cast tend to stick closer to the historical evidence. Not precise recreations, but basically accurate. Our principal cast, though, takes some liberties.
I think you found a loophole. And a hat.
There's a tried and true method for adding a little bit of spice to your historical costuming, which is to stick to a very historically grounded silhouette and then go buck wild with the colors and the fabrics. This is the basis of the approach of shows like Bridgerton, and this is basically what The Great does in season 1. Our heroine is Catherine the Great, sort of, portrayed by Elle Fanning.
Of Russia.
Yep. Russia.
And she wears a pretty consistent uniform in the first season. It's a pared down version of 18th century court dress with a strict historical cut and design, but the colors and textures can sometimes be striking and interesting. Other major characters get a similar treatment, although none of them are as attention-grabbing or cool as hers. The show actually got a new costume designer for season 2. Her name is Sharon Long, and she built on the patterns that were established in the first season.
Lots of research, and then look at what, for me, I was going to take into season 2 and how I was going to change it.
In this season, we see a lot more embellishments and interesting patterns brought into the mix, but the general approach to the costuming is the same as season 1. But plot-wise, this season brings the costumer something new to contend with. The end of the first season throws the curveball that Catherine is pregnant.
He loves you, and you have his baby, an heir inside you. You are safe.
You told him that I'm pregnant.
This revelation abruptly shifts the balance of power, and it sets up major tensions for the second season.
Hello, Paul. It's me, Daddy.
So our Catherine is going to get a fake baby bump, and she's going to need maternity costumes. And this change isn't just going to matter for the costumes aesthetically. This pregnancy is core to the storyline, the themes, and the humor of most of season 2. They have to get the visual of this right. Obviously, I wasn't in the room for this design process, but based on interviews, we have a pretty good sense of how this went down.
That was quite complex, actually, because the 18th century woman's shape is a tiny waist and a big skirt, and what we'd got was a diminishing waist, and an 18th century waist is long, so you've got that kind of shape at the front. And of course, we were losing that because the baby bump was coming up higher and higher. So Catherine's waistline was disappearing and it was moving up higher, which it took quite a lot of twirls and on each baby bump to kind of make sure that we didn't completely lose the period and end up sort of in 1820 or something with a high waistline.
Sharon Long started her design process with the historical record. She started creating Catherine's maternity wardrobe, building on the basis of all that historical context we just talked about. We're bringing that back in. This is why there was a test. So she started with a historical silhouette, went wild with the colors and the fabrics, and it wasn't working. The production team really quickly realized that fundamentally this wasn't working. We don't have images of those early designs, but I think we can get a sense of what they probably looked like by referencing some other works. It's actually not super common to see pregnancy represented in 18th century period pieces because, you know, as discussed, it's goofy and weird and seems wrong, but there are a couple examples of people trying to do it with some accuracy. This is hurting my head a little bit. Beauty is pain. The Duchess, starring Keira Knightley, includes an upper-class pregnancy in 1780s England. Keira Knightley's costumes, while her character is pregnant, appear to be gowns that she could have worn before the pregnancy, just with slight adjustments. In this gown, you can see that the lacing is adjusted for a wider fit over the stomach than at the bust. Her stomacher extends over her belly, preserving that illusion of the fashionable long torso. So taking the overall effect of this costume, there is a lot of character we can glean from it. It screams rich, it screams stylish, but it kind of whispers pregnant. You can definitely see that Georgiana is pregnant if you look for it, but if you see her seated or in a shot from the waist up, you could easily not realize this character is pregnant. When you do notice the bump, it's because your eye is drawn to it by the camera or by the actor. There's another good example in season 2 of Outlander, which also has an upper-class European pregnancy, this time in 1744 Paris. Outlander operates on a different plane than the question of like, this is historically accurate or inaccurate, but for our purposes right now, the costume we look at is pretty consistent with the historical record. Again, we have an open front gown pinned across a long stomacher, and the opening is widened to account for the bump. In these years, the fashion was for extra volume horizontally at the hips, and our character is still wearing that padding, so her frame is basically widened in 3 directions, the hips and the front. This is what I mean about there not really being one bump, it's just kind of... She's clearly pregnant, and you'll definitely see it if you know what to look for, but the specific contours of the belly are completely obscured. In profile, you can see that there's a huge bump, but from the front, the clothes maintain that illusion of a long, flat torso. I noticed that in this scene, which is a scene plot-wise where the pregnancy is really important, Claire keeps holding the underside of her belly with her hands. She's not just touching the bump, she's bringing her hands all the way underneath it. This isn't weird. The action reads as natural and maternal to me, and it especially makes sense during the parts of the scene where she's in pain, but I think also the actor might be doing it so she can pull the fabric back and give the camera a chance to capture the shape of her pregnant body. And most of the time when she's not doing that, she just looks like a dark blob. Our attention has to be brought to the baby when the character's attention is. So, returning to Catherine and the Great. You're really witnessing the full life cycle of these heatless curls. So Sharon Long could have stayed with the same approach as in the rest of the show, okay? A strictly historical design and then punch it up with the colors, the fabrics, the fun stuff. It's what she does for most of the characters in most of the scenes, and it's even what she does for Catherine after the pregnancy, but it would not have worked for Catherine's maternity looks. And hopefully we're already kind of on the same page about why, so let's watch it in action. Let's watch how Catherine is reintroduced to the viewer at the beginning of season 2. If you'd forgotten between seasons that Catherine is pregnant, you could easily miss it in some of these early shots. The opening scene is all about the face. It grounds the season in Elle Fanning's performance and Catherine's human emotion. She's stressed, she's in grief, she's thinking about her lost love. She's not an empress in this moment, not a wife, not a leader, she's just a woman.
And yet somehow at the end she's just a girl and she's just scared.
I hate it, but you know what I mean. Now this costume is probably the most historically grounded look in all of Catherine's maternity wardrobe. And this makes perfect sense because everything else about the cinematography here, okay? Everything about the way that this scene is shot and edited is telling me that as the viewer, I'm not meant to be looking at the bump yet. Catherine is mostly shot from the chest up. When we do see the rest of her, Nothing is drawing attention to the belly, including the costume. When she's shot from the back, you can see signs of the pregnancy prosthetic if you're looking for it, but again, only if you're looking for it. It's totally missable, especially because her back and her sides are still corseted and sleek. The show even employs some old-fashioned TV magic here to keep you from looking at the belly. Look at him holding up this shriveled head in front of her bump like she's hiding a real-life pregnancy on a network sitcom. It's like the big bags in How I Met Your Mother, but instead it's like the dead from the Revolution. And just like in those examples from Outlander and The Duchess, the viewer's eye isn't drawn to the bump until the moment that Catherine herself is thinking about it. This rare moment when Catherine caresses her bump, it isn't sweet, it's funny. It's weird and darkly funny.
Can we have our head back?
No, you can't have the head back.
Bitch.
You have a way with kids.
Let's hope so.
The maternal gesture is ironic and amusing because it totally mismatches the setting, the context, everything we know of who Catherine is as a person. It's the exact same type of tension as this bit in episode 6 when Catherine has pastries thrown at her and tries to brush it off.
You have some cake.
Today, we do something meaningful today.
We're being very serious, but she has frosting on her face. You can't do that. It probably seems like I am over-explaining a very simple joke right now. That's a social transgression to say serious things with a frosting on your face, or to plot a coup when you're pregnant. I know we all get this, it's Irony 101, but I did want to name this because this irony is at the heart of season 2 of The Great. It is not usually nearly so explicit, but it is always there. The juxtaposition between Catherine's impending motherhood and her violent, cynical, very adult world is building tension throughout the episodes. And it's a source of subversive humor. Why do I hate myself? And it's a source of weird subversive humor throughout the whole lead up to Paul's birth, even when there aren't jokes about it on page. Moments like this one are sharper, more shocking and funny because Catherine is visibly hugely pregnant. But for those moments of tension and humor to land, Catherine has to be visibly, hugely pregnant. And that look from the first scene doesn't cut it. The irony in that moment only works because the characters point out the pregnancy in their dialogue and action. And they can't do that all the time. It ruins the joke. And it's also just not in character.
I don't think that Catherine super maternal until and didn't want to address the pregnancy until, you know, she had to, until it starts to kick her and she's kind of like, oh right, there's a baby in there. You know, she's too busy thinking up other things, and it's useful to her, obviously. But then again, okay, it's going to be a real human being, so she's going to have to grapple with that and how to become a mother. But I was aware not to, I don't know, something that we talked about early on, not touching the stomach too much. I don't know, sometimes I feel like, also in movies too, when people are like always touching the stomach.
Absolutely, yes.
I was like, and I also don't think Catherine would care, so it was just like, and I didn't try to acknowledge the baby until it was a scene that was kind of okay about the baby that I had to acknowledge it.
Now, one reason the costumes were changed after the first episode seems to have been purely functional. Initially, Elle Fanning was fitted with the prosthetic pregnant belly and then had maternity stays put on over top. This is totally the logical way to do it, right? That emulates an actual pregnancy, but the shape of it wasn't right.
I mean, the bump itself, for a while we used the bump and we had a maternity corset made to go over the top. And that wasn't working because it wasn't a real pregnancy. So unfortunately, the sort of the corset was moving around.
Apparently, the stays interacted with the fake belly very differently than they would have with a real one. The prosthetic was never meant to bear the pressure of stays. Even a highly realistic fake belly is never going to perfectly mirror the way that real weight can be shifted and redistributed on a body. Now, maybe if they really put their mind to it, the production team could have gone to the Hulu lab and designed a state-of-the-art prosthetic that was optimized for historical undergarments, but they found a much simpler way.
But Elle needed the corset because it's good for your posture in that period, and also it creates a framework under the costumes. So we reversed it, and that helped.
She wore the stays, and then wore the belly on top.
And of course, corsets. Funny enough, I was like, great, I don't have to wear corsets this season. This is so amazing. They're like, no, they still wore them over the pregnancy. And then, so we were going to do a thing where it's like, okay, but still it would be over the bump, so it wouldn't be tight. And then they're like, the clothes don't look as good, so I would wear a corset underneath the bump.
What?
Yep.
I am obsessed with this. He did the stays and then the belly. This is hilarious. And it is so clever and so revealing about the unique challenges of historically inspired costuming. Side note, if I can get on my soapbox for a bit, this is a great example of why I reject the idea that historical reproduction is somehow like the gold standard in costuming. Isn't this story so much more interesting? Like, this is the art part of it. It is so cool and so funny, and they never would have figured this out if they didn't have the freedom to just kick history to the curb when they needed to. There were a couple times that they couldn't use this method, most notably this look, which is easily the most iconic in season 2. I'm sorry, coronation gown that took 2 weeks, you're beautiful, blah, 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 but you are no hot mess, breakdown, bender, girl boss underwear moment. This scene is actually the only time we're fully able to see the details of Catherine's maternity stays, so it's pretty cool. So there was definitely a functional issue with the original historically grounded designs, and they kind of worked that out, but there was also a visual issue. Sharon Long says those original designs just didn't look right. And she's not super specific about what this means, but I think it's easy to tell when we look at the difference from the first episode to the next.
There's a short period in episode 1 where we hadn't got that and it wasn't quite working.
It's not just that the bump is placed a little differently, Catherine's entire look is much closer to a 21st century aesthetic of pregnancy. Instead of trying to take the belly and squeeze it into the proper silhouette, Sharon Long started taking the opposite approach, and she started to follow Catherine's rising waistline and design gowns around the belly. In episode 2, I think you can tell that they're using the new stays then belly method. Catherine's front no longer shows one smooth line from the bust through to the stomach. Instead, there's an angle where her stomach begins. This dress still has one foot in history in terms of design. The jacket has a stiff peplum that adds extra volume at the waist, to the sides, and back. Catherine is no longer wearing the panniers at her hips like she did in the previous season, so this provides some continuity and hangs on to that mid-18th century horizontal look. Look at that, she's got a stomacher, and we can see the telltale widening of the lacing towards the bottom. But the bodice isn't as long as we would expect. Already, the waistline is creeping up. It's much higher than what would be fashionable. You can easily compare it to the waists of the other women on screen, but it definitely isn't all way to being above the stomach. In the following episode, Catherine's waistline has completely overtaken her rising bump. This dress is essentially an empire waist.
Sharon really helped with the costumes too. Everything kind of became a little more umpire waist, a little flowier and practical.
To the modern eye, I think this 100% reads as a maternity gown. Catherine looks like a 21st century rich pregnant woman, like Kate Middleton would wear this. The look is classy and streamlined, but the soft drape of the skirts over her bump seems natural and maternal. It's feminine, it's elegant, I would wear it, I want it, I need it. Now prior to this scene, Catherine's just had a major fashion moment with her coronation gown. It was also a major political moment where she took a huge step in elbowing Peter away from power and consolidating her own authority.
God, if I...
You don't talk, my love.
The great loves to marry a fashion moment with a plot moment, and I love that. So the next time Catherine sees Peter, she's determined to be in control. She's saying what she wants. She's wearing what she wants. Gaslight, gatekeep, girl boss. But Peter does not seem to be respecting new girl boss Catherine, and he hugely pisses her off. And so...
Violence is not the answer to everything.
In this court, it is a language that everyone understands. You will not get far if you do not come to terms with that.
Fine. Guards!
So Catherine's appearance is at its most feminine, elegant, and maternal of the season so far. And that costume exactly coincides with her most violent, vengeful moment of action that we've seen yet. She is at her least controlled, least compassionate. She is the most at war with the father of her baby. Now, at that particular moment, the juxtaposition here isn't funny.
Can you hear me now?
Fucking hell.
Okay, it's a little funny. Mostly, though, it's uncomfortable. It's one of those moments that The Great does so well where it draws you in and then pops the bubble and sharply reminds you that you are rooting for villains. Catherine could have appeared in this scene dressed for battle. We see plenty of masculine, military-inspired looks from her later, and those looks, which would not have created the same friction in this scene, they don't show off the bump. It's this lovely, motherly, bump forward dress that makes the moment so much more shocking and sobering. A historically accurate look would never have worked for this moment, or at the very least it would have changed the tone of the scene significantly. And the great always wants to keep one foot, or even just one toe, in subversion and humor. Catherine sticks to this style for the next few episodes, and let's just take a moment to appreciate how absolutely exquisite these dresses are. I have never seen anything like this. The waistlines stay high, but somehow they never read as being not 18th century, which is kind of miraculous. Like, this should ruin things. It should disrupt the carefully constructed world for them to let a character basically completely abandon the 1770s silhouette. But it doesn't. I somehow still believe in these gowns.
How do you balance, like, your research and obviously the fidelity to that era of costumes with do you try to subvert it all for the tone of the show, I guess?
I think I always feel if you don't actually anchor something properly in your research, it sort of goes too far. I wanted to, although I think played around quite a lot with the period, I hope that it still reads as mid sort of 18th century, and you've created a little world within history, if you like.
The designs are able to hold on to some specific historical details. The cut of the sleeves, the shape of the neckline, the back piecing. Often the gowns close up the front, or they include decorative stomachers. These little details help convince me that we're still in period. The result of all of this is a brand new category of garment that isn't at all historical, but somehow perfectly fits into the Greats funhouse version of the 18th century. I'm completely obsessed. As Catherine approaches the end of her pregnancy and her prosthetic gets hilariously big, they do drop some of these remaining historical details in favor of something a little more free-flowing and comfortable. This makes a lot of sense with Catherine's character. She's practical and active, and she's getting pretty tired of being so uncomfortable in her body. These looks do start to edge into Regency territory with the voluminous skirts and looser shoulders.
I think about episode 8, she's sort of 7 and 8, she's at her biggest. And then I could let go of the waist, which was actually a relief because it was quite difficult working with it moving up. And then the minute that we got into the soft shapes, they became themselves quite mid-18th century because there was a lot of loose shapes around then. It's just that they're not great on camera for us. It becomes too billowing. But in actual fact, when she got to sort of 9 months and we used much softer fabrics, and that's where I refer to quite a lot of sort of contemporary fashion, actually.
I want to highlight this really tense scene at the end of episode 6, where Catherine is out of her Empire waistline for the first time in a while. She's in one of her more historically accurate looks, with a long jacket that obscures the bump. It's very reminiscent of that first look from season 2. This is also one of the most serious moments of the whole season. Things have gone wrong, really wrong, and Catherine is forced to face her inadequacies as a leader. She's having a deeply human moment. Just like in that opening sequence, the focus is all on Elle Fanning's face and her portrayal of grief and hopelessness.
And yet somehow at the end she's just a girl and she's just scared.
And when Peter sees her and he makes the decision not to harm her, this time it has nothing to do with the baby. This moment is all about Catherine as a person and their relationship. From a story perspective, it wouldn't do any good to draw attention to the bump in this moment. And because they've put her in a historical silhouette, the baby bump just fades from view. Oh, that's making my head hurt. It's what you get when you get your tiaras from Jeffrey Bezos. Now you may be saying, Kate, it's been an hour. This video was supposed to be about the best costume in The Great, and so far you've spent the whole time talking about Catherine's costumes and a bunch of other characters that aren't even in this show. Where is this best costume in The Great that we were promised? It was just there. Do you not see it? Let me back it up. There it is! So a couple months ago, I made some TikToks that were ranking my favorite costumes from this season, and something caught my eye in the 3rd episode that I did not notice at all my first time watching the show. Something magical. I think I only caught this because I was watching the show carefully, paying attention to the costumes with this exact subject in mind. Do you see it? It was right there! I wasn't 100% certain about what I was seeing, so I skipped ahead to see the next time this character was on screen, and, well, that's right.
We're waving to you because we're being exiled to France. What the fuck?
Huh, that's funny. You know, let me check something. Boys, we got her. Sure enough, Charity Wakefield, who plays Georgiana in The Great, not to be confused with this other Georgiana, she was pregnant during filming. Significantly pregnant. A tweet of hers says she was on set for the show well into her 8th month, and I have to assume that that's what we're looking at here. After this episode, the character doesn't appear again until episode 9. It is mind-blowing to me that I did not notice this the first time, and that basically nobody who watches the show casually happens to notice this, and I was just so delighted and excited by this discovery because, like, this is my thesis here! Like, this is all the thoughts and ideas I've had about the costumes in this season just being, like, very casually proven by, like, a thing that happened to happen in the production. This show has an actor whose character isn't pregnant, but the actor is 8 months pregnant, and to disguise or hide the pregnancy, they do nothing. There is, like, no attempt in the cinematography, in the direction, in anything to hide this. There are several shots where we see her full body with an unimpeded view of her stomach. Sometimes she is in profile, and yet I didn't even notice. And they were confident enough that nobody was gonna notice that they just left it like this. And it worked. You don't notice it. And not because of cinematography, not because of any fancy editing or TV tricks. These aren't TV tricks. These are 18th century fashion tricks. This gown is the most historically accurate costume on television. I will not be taking criticism on that. It is accurate in the real ways, in every way that actually counts. If you pause on Georgiana in profile, you can see how far out her stomach extends. It is so obvious once you know to look for it. But the line down her front is totally smooth. I think she might actually be wearing maternity stays. And once you factor in the dark color of the gown, the bump just fades from view, hidden in plain sight. Granted, it is possible that the show took additional measures, you know, under the gown to camouflage the pregnancy that go beyond what would be accurate to the 18th century, but look at that profile. Whatever they did, they didn't do much. That lady is pregnant. Georgiana's look shows us exactly what Catherine would have looked like if Sharon Long didn't radically alter her approach for this season. This is what a pregnant person looks like in the costumes of The Great. And what they look like is not pregnant. Works like The Great can really get shortchanged when it comes to costume analysis. Online, the bulk of the discussion of historical costumes focuses on parsing out what is and isn't historically accurate, which is fun and interesting and valuable, but is kind of beside the point. When costumes are clearly and unapologetically not seeking accuracy, they can sometimes be dismissed too easily. Oh, well, it's not trying to be accurate, so we won't give it a hard time about failing, but, you know, it's just fun and silly and cool fashion. You know, we like it, but that's all there is to say. And that does such a disservice to the incredible art on display here. Catherine's maternity wear has a really complex relationship with 18th century fashion. Trying to plot it on a spectrum of accurate versus inaccurate just isn't a useful approach. These looks are the costuming equivalent of speculative fiction. They offer a really rich perspective on the actual maternity dressing of the real past, in addition to deepening the make-believe world of the show. It's some of the most beautiful and interesting and deep costume work put on screen in the last few years. And Georgiana's maternity look proves how deep it goes. This is a team of costume design and construction professionals who are so well versed in the actual dress history and so confident in it that they will put this dress on screen and just let it do its job. Not to sound too cheesy, but like this is magic. This is fashion magic in action. I feel so powerful. I'm gonna start wearing this to work.